Hi, it's Michelle at Living Blue in Texas. Today I am with Frank Ramirez out of San Antonio. Frank is running for House District 118, right? Yeah, okay. And he actually ran again, ran last year in a runoff. We'll talk about that. But Frank, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about who you are?
Sure. Thank you so much for the opportunity to chat with you. My name is Frank Ramirez. I am the Democratic nominee for House District 118. And just a little bit of background about myself. I'm a lifelong Texan and lifelong San Antonian. I'm a product of the Harlandale Independent School District public education system here in the south side of San Antonio, where I went to elementary, middle, and high school. I graduated high school in 2012. Then went off to the University of Texas at Austin, where I studied government and communications. I've been working in public service since I was 14 years old.
Wow.
When I worked on my first bond with my school district, being a poll greeter, and it was immediately apparent that public service, reaching out to the community and talking with the people, the voters, though my neighbors in the community, is the ultimate form of engagement. Hearing them not only when they go to the polls, but by knocking on their door and going to where they live. And so it's always been a part of me since a very early age that that we have a very robust community engagement effort at all forms of government, not just at the state representative level. But I worked through college. I was a Senate messenger in the Texas Senate. I interned with the Senate Finance Committee, and then I came back home after my time in Austin, and I actually worked with former Representative Uresti as legislative director and chief of staff during the 85th session back in 2017. And so it's all a cumulative effort because this is the same district that I worked in 4 or 5 years ago. And I'm seeking to represent it now. Somebody who's from the area, who knows the area, who lives in the area, and you know, is able to speak confidently on a number of issues because of the experiences that I've gathered through my life, whether it be working in the legislative arena at the Texas House of Representatives, or my tenure in the city council offices that I've worked in over the last 4.5 years. In the city council here in San Antonio, I worked as a zoning director for Councilwoman Ana Sandoval in District 7. And I'm currently the community engagement director for another council person. And so it's important for me to utilize every single experience that I've gained throughout my life and apply it to the people that matter most, my community, those people that are needing assistance, whether it be assistance with the utilities or streets, all things that don't necessarily fall under the purview of a state representative, but
Right.
you build the partnerships. You build the partnerships and you work with the people that you've worked with for the past decade, and you make those changes happen for every single person that you can. In that effect, we're not running a partisan race in those things. You can't put partisanship on safe infrastructure. You know,
Yeah.
you can't put partisanship on access to healthcare. Now they try
They
to every
do. Yeah,
single
they
day,
do. Right.
right? But we should, because guess what? Everybody deserves a fair shake to live a healthy life. Everybody deserves a fair shake to walk down the streets that they pay taxes on, and feel comfortable and safe in their own neighborhoods. And so those are the things that matter to me a lot, including a lot of others. But that's something that needs to be said because we need to elevate those conversations. We have an entire population of people who have been historically marginalized and historically forgotten here in this district, who don't want to have those conversations because they don't believe that anything will happen.
Yeah.
To make sure that they know we will be working every single day to make sure that those changes do indeed happen.
Okay. So let's talk about District 118, because District 118 was left open by an abrupt resignation last year. You did go to a special election, and you didn't quite make it, but the turnout was like really, 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 really low. And I was really shocked because, I saw online that there were a lot of reps that went into San Antonio to help you, did door knocking. And, it really just wound up being that people stayed home. What do you think it's going to take, because this is a midterm election,
Right.
to get people to the polls to make sure that they're casting their vote?
Well, I think it's important that Democrats specifically prioritize the bread and butter issues, right? We're again talking about healthcare, public education, infrastructure. And then you start talking about the things that are impacting Texans in their everyday life, right? So we're talking about the governor, closing down ports of commerce, ports of entry on the border to Mexico, which lost us over $100 million of economic value over just a couple of days.
Yeah.
You talk about how that act is going to affect the supply chain management here in the state, just for those couple of days of political posturing. And you see that reflected at the grocery store or at your Target or wherever you might shop for your home goods. And we need to highlight those things, that we have a state leadership and we have a party in power right now that is willing and able to play with our pocketbooks. They're able to say, we're going to go ahead and upcharge your electric bill every single month until we are able to pay back the mistakes that we made during the 2021 winter storm. We're talking about a state leadership who's failing our children right now, and we need to be talking about that at the public education level. We see a number of schools that don't have the funding necessary to retain teachers, to ensure that what's being taught in those schools are left up to the subject matter experts in their fields. And then at the end of the day, we're also talking about those that are in the foster care system or in our state's child protective services, right? We're talking about protecting them and making sure that we are adequately supplying them with the resources necessary to keep those children safe and to prevent bad actors from inserting themselves into those departments and into those children's lives. So I think that it's a mix, right? We are looking at what some might be calling a pretty tough midterm, which is typical of what happens whenever the party in power goes through a midterm. There's usually a flip to the other side in some forms of government. However, I think in Texas, with all of those things ramping up, with these conversations being had on a day-to-day basis, that we are going to be able to educate them, specifically in House District 118, where those bread and butter issues are the issues, right? Yeah. Sometimes people aren't necessarily ready or willing to talk about what goes up in Austin because they're barely trying to scrape by in their own neighborhoods, right? And so that's what I'm doing. One of my the reason why we were so successful and we almost had it during the special election last year was because we were talking about those bread and butter issues, but also we were bringing the conversation to the people. I knocked on over 4,000 or 5,000 doors myself in a matter of a month, right? Yeah. And that takes an incredible amount of bandwidth and dedication, but you know what? It's worth it every single day to do it. And it counts because I talked to several of my neighbors who said, you're the first candidate to knock on my door since I started living here. When did you move in? I moved here in 1970, or I moved here in 1980.
Yeah.
And that's unacceptable, right? Because that leads to a larger issue that we have to start having frank conversations about. Do Democrats rely on the Hispanic vote here in Texas? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Do we work as hard to bring them home when it really counts? I don't think we do. And so it's incumbent on candidates like myself to highlight those kind of gaps that we see in our political process, in our electoral process, in the campaign world, to go out there and bring them home. Because guess what? Those are the same people who have known for the past 40 years, 50 years that, well, it's just another politician. It doesn't have to be like that anymore. And we're proving that every day by bringing the conversation, bringing the effort to them and telling them, come on home. We're ready for you. And it's not just my race, it's up and down the ballot too. Yeah. So that's the efforts that we're looking at. And that's why it's important this cycle that we all get together, we all come together and work hard on engaging those that may have been, disenchanted by this process over the last 6-8 years.
Yeah, I agree. So healthcare, you mentioned healthcare. Right now in Texas, there are like 6 million people that are uninsured. We have 27 rural hospitals that have shut down over the last decade.
Right.
It's an average of almost 1,000 people that are dying every single year in Texas because they don't have access to, medicine and the healthcare that they need. What can the state house do to fix that?
Right. So, and I'm going to speak specifically about my district, and then we'll talk on a statewide level here, right?
Okay.
As hopefully the next representative of this district, right? We're able to, as members, introduce specific bills that cater to a specific subsection of a county or a municipality, right? It's called a bracketed bill. And, you're able to really work with other legislators and say, hey, this isn't a bill that's going to affect all Texans. It's not even going to affect your district. It's going to affect the people in my district and in the general area. That could be to funnel funds to helping build a program that introduces urgent care to rural areas who otherwise might drive 45 minutes to an hour to get to their nearest urgent care. Right. I'll give you a quick piece of information, a quick stat. In District 118 in the South Side, which the majority of District 118 people live, the South Side, that means South Bexar County, South San Antonio, we have an average life expectancy in the South Side of around 75, 76 years, male and female. When you go to zip code 78254, which is in the northwest side of San Antonio, you're looking at an average expected life of 90 years old. That's
Wow.
a 15, 16-year difference in
Wow.
life expectancy, right? So healthcare is a few things. It's not just access to a hospital. It's access to insurance. It's access to alternative healthy ways of eating, right? So we have a significant food desert in the south side of San Antonio and South Bexar County, where you have to drive, again, 45 minutes to get to your nearest fresh produce supermarket. And you have people that don't have cars or that are on fixed incomes and that rely on public transportation. Simply getting to the store might be a day's trip. And so it's a lot of things to connect the dots. If we had healthier residents, we would have healthier life expectancies, one. But then again, we have, like you said, at the state level, 6 million people that are uninsured. Expansion of Medicaid needs to be the answer. Because guess what? By not being insured, the state is paying more out of its pocket. The state is paying more out of its pocket to take care of those people. And it's putting the onus on the taxpayers doubly, more so than if we just expanded Medicaid and provided, relief and medical insurance to a population of people that never had it. It's not just a personal issue. It's not just a you and I issue, an individual issue. It's an entire state issue because everybody pays into it. And we need to be fiscally responsible as our state leadership says that we are, and do this thing with the support all across the board. It's what needs to happen. I'll say this, my opponent said he's up in the air about that. He's up in the air. He needs to look a little bit further into it. He wants to solve the crisis at the border first. I would challenge him to say, what crisis is occurring right now that your party has not created?
Yeah.
And then what solutions are you willing to make in order to solve the problems that you create, just like the debacle that the governor put us through this past week? So I'm all for expansion of Medicaid. I think it needs to happen sooner rather than later, and I look forward to pushing and supporting legislation that will expand Medicaid this upcoming session.
Okay, perfect. So you mentioned the border. We have to talk about it because it's on every Republican news feed and radio show, and that's all they talk about. Now, most of the Republicans that talk about the border, they live in New York or they live in Wyoming, or they don't live in Texas. But even the Republicans in Texas, like I'm in North Texas, and we've got, guys left and right, Republicans, so concerned about how that's affecting us, but it's not. We don't see anything different. We don't see a flow of drugs. We don't see, a jobs loss. We're not seeing what these, crisis is, other than the Republican talking points. How do you think that Democrats, you or any Democrats, can overcome this imaginary issue that Republicans have just created for votes, I guess?
No, you're absolutely correct. It's a fabricated issue. Um, Immigration and, cross-country migration has been the founding point of our nation for over 250 years, right? And so the importance of that specific talking point for the Republican Party is that it creates a monster that doesn't exist, and they're the hero to slay the monster, right? That's what they're trying to do. Give me a specific issue regarding voter fraud. Name five off the top of your head in which our state has invested millions of dollars to prevent from happening. That's right. You create a problem in order to force a solution, in order to get that speaking point. That's the same thing happening with the border. My opponent has said time and time again, he supports Donald Trump. He supports, the wall in certain places, but not in others. Where's the process behind that? Why is the wall more helpful in some places than not? What data are you using to inform those decisions, first off? And then what do you mean when you say these people are coming into our country, creating warehouses and storehouses and stash houses in District 118? There is rarely any news about any of those things because it rarely happens. And they're going to take this one all the way. And it's on the backs of people that, again, have been disenfranchised, that are simply looking for a better way of life. And in some cases, I mentioned this during a forum last year. The city of San Antonio had, back in 2019, 2018, an influx of Haitian immigrants, people that were passing by through our city because of the earthquakes, because they had family members here in the United States that were going to help them. So yes, they're crossing the border, right? And yes, they're trying to get somewhere else, but then that means they're with their families again. That means that they're in a healthy, safe environment. That is the same issue that we're looking at the border right now. And guess what? If we didn't have packed courts in the state of Texas that are slowing the process down for people to gain entry into our country in order for them to get to the places they need to be, there would be no immigration problem. It is the problem they're creating. It's the problem that they're profiting off of. And they're going to continue perpetuating it on the backs of people that simply are looking for help, which I am completely against. And I think that as a Democrat, we need to be taking the side of compassion. We need to ensure that we're talking about the stories of the individual, not the fear that's been created around the whole.
Okay, I like it. So education, another priority for you. It is another big hot button issue on both sides.
Right.
You have Republicans that are talking about school vouchers and critical race theory. And the Democrats, we really just want to make sure that teachers are well funded and, they have the tools that they need to be successful.
Right.
So, the House may not flip. What do we do if we're 70, 75 or whatever, to come together as a bipartisan way to make sure that the teachers' needs are met?
Right. So I think one of the first things that we can do as a state is take care of our retirees, right? Make sure that we have a population of retired teachers who have been called back to duty, by the way, due to how badly public teachers are being treated in their own jobs due to the constraints of the state. They can't read certain books now. They have to teach certain things now, all while making about less than they probably made when they started, right? Due to inflation, due to a number of factors like stagnating wages, but increased cost of living. So it starts with our retirees, and then it starts with our teachers, making sure that they have reasonable benefits, making sure that our retirees get a cost of living adjustment that they haven't seen in almost over 20 years, and then making sure that we are allowing, again, the subject matter experts to teach what needs to be taught, not just by our curriculum set by the state and the TEA, but things like financial literacy and health, things like computer science, which is a booming technological job description right now.
Yeah.
You know, we're talking about making sure that we have a generation of kids that have a generation of teachers that are free to do and teach what they need to create a more just society with this upcoming generation. We are seeing all of that under attack once again by those fabricated things that Republicans are making up. I challenge any state legislator who disagrees with this to sit in a classroom at Kingsborough Middle School or McCullum High School here in the South Side and identify where CRT is being taught. Just because it makes you uncomfortable doesn't mean it's indoctrination. Progress is uncomfortable. And guess what? If we're trying to move into a specific area in the future of this state, we have to be uncomfortable about some things. And guess what? That's called growing pains. And if we can, as a society, could sustain these growing pains, we'll be big and strong at the end of the day. And I think that's a paramount issue right now, that Republicans at state and national leaders are looking to pack our school boards. It's terrible. And I'll tell you why. You know, you think about a charter school's board of managers, right? Or their board. It's not a duly elected board. It's an appointed board by the CEO of those charter schools. You think of a public, an independent school district. That's a duly elected board by the people. Neither systems are perfect, but guess what? We have the guidelines that we need to follow in our public education system. Charter schools may not. You know, talk to me about the special education programs with charter schools. Talk to me about acceptance rates of students with, you know, delinquent or potentially harmful backgrounds. Talk to me about how those schools are catering to those specific types of students. They're not. So why is it that they're a part of our public education formula? Why is it that they receive a percentage of the amount of money that's supposed to be going to true public schools, the ones that serve every single person, regardless of their demographic, geographic, or even, you know, their behavioral status? Why is it that we aren't having that conversation? It's because I believe that we have a Republican Party that's seeking to eliminate the public education system as a whole. And they want to ensure that charter schools are the next step of taking control of education, educating our children. Whereas we have guideline standards and set things that we teach every year through TEKS. You know, the same probably is not met in a charter school, and we need to be aware of that.
Including private schools too, because with the voucher system, they would like to take our tax money and, you know, send them to a religious school or a charter school or wherever they choose. And, you know, it's our tax dollars. And
Right.
So speaking of tax dollars, right now Texas has the sixth highest tax property rate in the country.
Right.
Our property taxes are through the roof. A lot of that is because of our education system.
Correct.
So I guess this is a two-part question. One, what do we do to better fund education? And two, how can we lower the property taxes?
So I'm taking my time thinking this through because it deserves a much more deliberate answer than just an off-the-cuff remark. Whenever we're talking about the state of homeowners in this state, you know, I take a look at my grandparents' house. I take a look at the neighbors that have lived next door to them for the past 60 years since they bought their home in 1965. I see families moving in that were related to the previous generation. Yet the taxing rate for those same homes that have had no improvements, that have not seen any change outside of passing it down to their sons, their daughters, or their grandsons and granddaughters, getting astronomical assessed values and appraised values. The issue is that we have a state government and a state leadership that does not target the single highest taxing entity on their tax rolls, which is the public education system. You know, the effective tax rate for a district down here in the South Side is probably like a $1.25 for every $1,000 or $100 on their valuation. If you have a $200,000 home, you're looking at over $2,000 easily just for your school taxes. And that's not to include the several dozen or so other taxing entities that are found in each and every county. We need to be cognizant that, you know, the state is the one responsible for defunding our education system right now and has been effectively doing it over the last 25 years. And that, again, is to discredit those same public education systems. It's so expensive, they're not able to do the work. It's expensive to the individual because the state as a whole is failing to fund it correctly. And we need to be cognizant of that. And that needs to be the talking point. It's not Miss Martinez's fault. It's not, you know, my grandparents' fault that they aren't able to pay 100% of their taxes maybe all the time, right? Some people are on fixed incomes, on Social Security. Some people might have disabilities. It is not incumbent on the individual to take up the charge of funding a system that should be completely funded by the state. And so how do we fix that? How do we, one, to your question, drop property taxes, right? How do we make it to where multi-generational families are not being taxed out of their homes, or those on fixed incomes are getting taxed out of their homes? And then two, how do we work towards a more equitable public education finance system? I think that it's going to be incumbent on the work that starts with my generation to really start tackling this property tax issue, and then in turn tackle the public education issue, in the sense that we need to just make marijuana a point of commerce in the state, because why not? You know, we are spending so much money every single year on low measured marijuana charges, you know, per bed in these privately owned but publicly funded prison systems.
Yeah.
And we have an entire generation of people that have been adversely impacted by the criminalization of a plant.
Yeah.
You look at a state like Colorado, who's able to fund a significant portion of their public education system simply by taxing marijuana and making it legal. So whether it be through a recreational use, which I hope is something that takes charge or takes head in this upcoming session, whether it's something that we have to, you know, rework our gas tax, right, in order to create a specific percentage of that to go to our public education system. If we tout that our natural energy, our natural gases and oil are a sustaining industry here in the state, why are we not making it to where it's supplementing everybody, you know, and not just infrastructure? So those are some of the ideas that I have. Are they going to catch? Are they going to catch when we get to the House? Probably not. You know, because it's not something that the party in power wants to see happen. We know for a fact that the public education system serves economically disadvantaged students across the board. It's not in the leader's best interest to see those people succeed, right? So institutionally, we have a problem. At a state leadership level, we have a problem. And I think that it's incumbent on the next generation of leadership to test out these ideas in the political arena and within our communities, and to really press these items. So that way we can find parity in that public education funding and our property tax inflation. I mean, it's ridiculous that we've seen valuations of homes that are worth $150,000 get pushed up to 280. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, right. So cannabis, we talked about cannabis, we talked about private prisons, and I would just like to make a note that if we look back to the last 10 years on the money that the Greg Abbott campaign and Dan Patrick campaign have received from private prison industries, we know why that, you know,
Right.
they haven't done anything. So infrastructure, what do we do? I mean, I know it's kind of like a broad question, but obviously it's broken. How do we fix it?
I think that there's an argument to be made, and that needs to be had, I think, on a municipal level. You talk about a city like Austin where it's very condensed. It's almost ultra condensed, and you have a large population of almost 1 million people now living in within 4 highways, right? And that's not sustainable. But then on the other hand, you take a city like San Antonio, where you do have 1.456 million people in the metropolitan area, and it takes an hour and a half to get from one side of town to the other. You know, different cities require different solutions, and infrastructurally, you know, we created a system of highways and streets that cater to an individual single car, single passenger system, right? As opposed to other countries or other states or other cities around the United States that cater to pedestrian friendly multimodal transportation, like biking, like transit, buses, train, things like that. Texas did not adopt that philosophy, and we're seeing the impact of that now. I-35 is one of the worst highways in the nation. You drive to Houston on I-10, one of the worst highways in the nation. And so we do really have to start thinking creatively. If in San Antonio the population is expected to be over 3 million people by the year 2040, right? We're supposed to double in population. What does that mean for the rest of the state? What does that mean for those areas that are already seeing 2-hour waits in the streets? How are we supposed to creatively address something like this when we've already been predisposed to handle the situation by just adding more cement and adding more asphalt? We need to start looking at different ways of really processing the infrastructure problem. And I'll speak directly to my specific district, right? We don't have a lot of infrastructural integrity here, because the way that the streets and development trended historically in San Antonio was redlined. So all the good stuff went to the northeast, north, and northwest sides. The west, south, and east sides of the city did not get any of those improvements. I remember growing up as a kid that there used to be wild horses that would run behind my house, and I was inside the loop. And so you take experiences like that, you match them up with the story of San Antonio as a whole, and you see that there was no justice served. Now we're getting there. The city of San Antonio passed its first equity lensed budget in 2017, the first equity lens bond in 2017, and we're starting to identify where using census tracts are the most impoverished people. Where are the people that need these improvements the most? Taking an approach like that on a statewide level might behoove us, might be in our best interest, because guess what? It's not the infrastructure that is serving, the least amount of people because they're wealthy. It's the infrastructure that's serving the middle class and lower class, the working class, that's going to matter, because guess what? Without them, everything else falls apart. So that's my philosophy on infrastructure. I think we need to stay away from roads at the state level. We do not need more taxes on our highways. So I do not believe in toll roads. They're helpful sometimes, but I do not believe in them. I don't think we should be expanding that system. And I think we need to take a serious look at inner city train transit, high-speed rail between San Antonio, Austin, Dallas, and Houston to start. And then guess what? Let's connect the rest of the city, or the rest of the state. If I can get on a train from San Antonio and I work in Austin and it gets me there in 20 minutes or 30 minutes, that 30 minutes between there and then takes a car off the road. It gives more productivity to the individual, while they're in transit. You get to Austin, you come back, guess what? Everybody will be using it, because it's going to be, the alternative is an hour and a half drive sitting in traffic. So I think there's a lot of ideas that we can discuss that we may not have time for today and that I would really like to get into the weeds about. But those are just the very minimal things that I think that we could be doing to improve our infrastructure in the state.
Yeah. And just a note, just because I think it's so funny, now that Elon Musk is a Texan, he wants to put those boring tunnels
Right,
um, under the ground. I don't know how that works, but we'll see. Um,
right.
so um, one more question, that I know we're kind of getting short on time. The electric grid, what do we do? Do we connect with the national grid? Do we replace things? I mean, what is the best step do you think that we should take?
Right. I think there's a number of things that we need to address. One, we need a clean house. We need a clean house with the commissioners that were directly responsible for this failure of our infrastructure and our grid. We need to make sure that the public understands that process. It's an educational factor now too, that the Texas Railroad Commissioner actually has uh, purview over the electric grid. And we have to make sure that we are holding those responsible and those who profited off this, this deadly event last year, are held to justice. There were several bills that were introduced over the past decade that would have really specifically targeted this type of weatherization improvement that would have prevented what happened in 2021. Guess what? Nobody wanted to bite because it didn't make them a buck. And now we paid for it with real people's lives, and still they profit. And that is just so concerning to me, because we have a system that lets you pay to play. And so if you want to improve your infrastructure, that's fine. That's the law. But if you don't want to improve your infrastructure, you can pay us a few $100 and you don't have to. And that's the law as well. So how are we supposed to have confidence in a system that is providing loopholes to those same companies that profited off of this tragedy, and that will continue to profit off of these tragedies as they become more frequent? It's something that we need to fix. And it's going to take a change of leadership to do that, because you're not gonna lead a horse away from water, right? You want to stick around to fill up as much as you can. And that's what I think the state leadership is doing. And it's evident by the millions of dollars that he got in campaign contributions this past cycle. So I think it's disheartening. I think it's a crime. And I think that we have to do everything in our power to bring home the infrastructural improvements that are necessary. And it might not be getting on the national grid. It might just be fixing what's at home already. And then at some point in the future, we would have to probably have those conversations. But it's unjust what happened and how they're able to get away with it, and then foot the bill to the taxpayers through their municipalities bills, CPS here in San Antonio. We're calling it the Abbott tax. It's
Tax, right?
exactly what it is.
Yep, yep, absolutely. Well, I have enjoyed talking to you so much.
Thank you.
I think that we should talk again before the election. So if hypothetically the election is tomorrow and you're standing on stage and everybody's listening to you, and what do you tell them to get out and vote for you tomorrow?
I tell them that it is incumbent on each and every one of us to make the change that we want to see. And there is no better time than now to change our state and change the world. We have to do everything in our power to bring out our friends, our family, and even those who do not want to vote, and get them to the polls and remind them of the importance of what's at stake. It's women's health. It's making sure that women have the autonomy to make the sensitive decisions in their life that belong to them and them alone. It's to make sure that we have those improvements that are needed throughout our impoverished areas, to make sure that we have healthcare across the board, and to make sure that our children and our teachers are well taken care of in a system that works for them, and not making them work for a system. And so those are the things I would say to bring people out. I'd also like to say, if you want to learn more about me, you can reach me at my cell phone number. I'm happy to talk. Shoot me a text, give me a call, 210-885-0374. That goes directly to my cell phone that I've had for the past 15 years. And, my
You're just
website is...
giving it out to everybody.
That's right. Every single person who wants to give me a call is able to give me a call, heckler or not. And then, of course, feel free to learn more about me on my website, frankfortexas.com. Follow me on all social media handles, the same name, Frank for Texas.
For FOR,
That's
Texas
right.
spelled out. Okay. Okay.
fortexas.com is the website, and then Frank for Texas, the same thing is all of my handles on all of my social media. So I look forward to chatting with you more in the future, and anybody who might be watching or listening, feel free to reach out to me. If you're in San Antonio, I'd be happy to buy you a coffee, and we can talk about the things that really matter to you.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, you have a great day, Frank.
Thanks. Likewise. Have a good one.
All right, bye-bye.